On May 5, 2026, the Reserve Bank of Australia raised interest rates for the third time this year. The cash rate is now back at 4.35%. Every single cut from 2025, gone, reversed. All three of them wiped out in just 5 months. And right after that announcement, every major lender in the country, NAB, Commonwealth, Westpac, Bank of Melbourne, passed the full rate hike on to borrowers, effective May 15th. Now here's where Melbourne gets interesting, because while the rest of the country is just dealing with higher mortgage repayments, Melbourne is dealing with that and something else entirely. The market here is shifting in a way that nobody completely saw coming. Inventory is climbing, clearance rates are falling, and buyers, for the first time in years, actually have the upper hand. So today, let's break down exactly what is happening in Melbourne's property market right now, why it got here, and what it actually means for you, whether you're buying, selling, renting, or investing. Let's start with the raw numbers, because they tell the story better than anything else. As of May 2026, the median dwelling value in Melbourne sits at around $822,969, according to Cotality. That's the company formerly known as CoreLogic. That number is now 1.9% below its peak from November 2025. So in roughly 6 months, Melbourne property values have quietly slipped back from their high point. And it's not one bad month. April 2026 was the second consecutive monthly decline. Values dropped another 0.6% in April alone. Now, to put that in perspective, Melbourne hit its peak in November 2025 and has been drifting lower ever since. That's 5 straight months of softening. Cotality Research Director Tim Lawless put it plainly when he said, "The softer trend in values is coinciding with falling auction clearance rates and a pickup in advertised supply, and that buyers now have more choice and less urgency at the negotiation table." That phrase, less urgency, is the key one, because for the past several years, Melbourne buyers had zero leverage. You either paid what sellers wanted or someone else did. That dynamic has flipped. Let's talk about auctions, because in Melbourne, that's where the market shows its true face every Saturday morning. For the week ending May 23, 2026, Melbourne recorded a clearance rate of 61.7%. The week before that, it was 62.1%. Compare that to this same week last year, it was 72.1%. That is a massive drop in 12 months. And it's not like fewer homes are going to auction. That same week in May, 1,032 homes were listed for auction in Melbourne. That's well above the 890 from the week before. Here's what that actually means in plain English. More homes are going under the hammer, but fewer of them are selling. Properties are passing in. Sellers are setting reserves that buyers aren't meeting. And instead of a room full of competitive bidders pushing a price up, you're getting quieter auctions, more post-auction negotiations, and agents calling the highest bidder the next morning to try to get something done. One snapshot from early May that went around on social media: on a single Saturday in Melbourne's inner suburbs, 27 apartments listed for auction, only 1 sold. 24 houses listed, only 1 sold. That's not an anomaly. According to reports, that was the pattern for the entire month of April. A clearance rate below 65% is generally seen as a buyer's market. Melbourne is sitting comfortably below that. Buyers who know this are walking into negotiations in a completely different headspace than they were 18 months ago. Now here's the part that really explains why there's more stock on the market. Investors are leaving Melbourne, and they've been leaving for a while. According to the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, PIPA, 22.1% of investors reported selling at least one property in Melbourne over the last year. That's the highest rate of investor selling of any capital city in the country. Melbourne was second at 19.7%. Melbourne was number 1 for all the wrong reasons, depending on which side you're on. Why are they selling?
Three main reasons. First, land tax. The Victorian government has dramatically changed the land tax rules. As of January 1st, 2026, vendors can no longer pass land tax adjustments onto buyers in contracts of sale. So if you're an investor who lists your property in January and settles in May, you're paying the entire year's land tax bill yourself. That's thousands of dollars that used to be split. Now it all falls on the seller. Second, the vacant residential land tax, which now applies statewide. Any property left vacant for more than 6 months anywhere in Victoria now attracts a penalty tax. That's a significant change from the old rules, which were limited to specific suburbs. Third, tenancy laws. Victoria has introduced more than 130 changes to rental regulations since 2021. Minimum energy standards, limits on rent increases, new eviction processes. One property investor named Joseph, who went viral on Melbourne radio station 3AW earlier this year, said he owns 10 investment properties in Victoria with long-term tenants, and he's selling every single one. His words, "I'm sick and tired of getting pounded into the ground by this government, introducing new taxes, new fees, new regulations." That sentiment is widespread. Kate Bacchus, chair of PIPA, told Yahoo Finance that Victoria has experienced a massive exodus of investors over the last few years, and she expects the trend to continue. The result? A flood of former rental properties hitting the market. In a recent 3-month period, landlords listed 5,565 former rental properties for sale in Melbourne alone, according to property analytics company Foundit. That's 21% of all homes listed in the city during that stretch being ex-rentals. Foundit described it as a flood. And that flood is what's driving inventory higher.
Let's connect this back to interest rates, because this is where it all ties together. Through 2025, the RBA cut rates 3 times. People were excited. Melbourne's market was expected to bounce back hard in 2026. KPMG's chief economist forecast Melbourne house prices would grow 6.8% this year. PropTrack and CoreLogic were saying 5 to 7%. The sentiment in January was cautiously optimistic. Then February came. The RBA hiked rates by 0.25%. Then March, another hike. Then May, another hike. 3 hikes in 5 months. The cash rate went from 3.6% back up to 4.35%, erasing everything 2025 had delivered. Roy Morgan now estimates that around 30.3% of Australian mortgage holders are at risk of mortgage stress under its household cash flow methodology. That is nearly 1 in 3 people with a home loan feeling the pressure every month. And when borrowers are stretched, what happens? They stop bidding aggressively at auctions. Some pull out of the market entirely. Others, particularly investors, decide to sell now rather than hold through more rate pain. Westpac is still forecasting 2 more hikes, potentially taking the cash rate to 4.85% by August. ANZ, CBA and NAB don't currently predict further hikes, but the RBA's next meeting is June 16th, and nobody is ruling anything out. Inflation in March hit 4.6%, well above the RBA's 2 to 3% target band. The bottom line is that borrowing is expensive, it's getting more expensive, and buyers know their limits, which means sellers have to price accordingly.
So where does all of this leave the different groups of people watching this market? If you're a buyer, this is genuinely one of the better negotiating environments Melbourne has seen in years. Clearance rates below 62% mean sellers are not getting the prices they hoped for. The vendor discount, the gap between what sellers list at and what they actually get, has been widening. There's more stock on the market, less competition in the room, and agents are following up after auctions rather than being able to walk away with a deal done on the day. That's leverage. Use it. If you're a seller, the message from every agent right now is the same. Price it right from day one.
Homes that are priced correctly are still moving. Homes that are priced based on peak 2025 expectations are sitting. The median house at auction over the past week sold for $1,040,000. That's down from $1,086,000 the week before and 4.1% lower than the same week last year. The market will tell you what it's worth. It's better to listen early than chase a price down over several weeks of reduced offers. If you're a renter, this is actually a complicated picture. Investors are selling, and that's adding to buyer inventory. But those homes aren't becoming rentals. They're leaving the rental market permanently. Melbourne's vacancy rate is extremely tight. Some data puts it below 1% in inner suburbs. Rents have risen over 4% annually, and in some suburbs, tenants are competing hard for limited options. The investor exodus that's helping buyers is quietly hurting renters.
Here's the full picture as of today, May 25, 2026. Melbourne's property market is in a rare moment. 3 RBA rate hikes this year have cooled buyer demand, and investor exodus driven by Victoria's land tax changes has flooded the market with extra listings. Auction clearance rates have dropped from over 72% last year to around 61% now. Prices have slipped 1.9% from their November 2025 peak, and buyers are sitting at the negotiating table with more power than they've had in years. But none of this means Melbourne is broken. The price gap between Melbourne and Sydney is at its widest in 20 years. Population is growing. Long-term forecasters, including KPMG, still expect meaningful price growth once the rate cycle turns. The question is timing, and right now the data is clearly in the buyer's corner. Whether that window stays open depends entirely on what the RBA does on June 16th, and that's why every buyer, seller, investor and renter in this city is watching that date very, very closely.